We have with us Mr. Joris, Vice President Consulting at Smart Tech Analysis, who will be talking regarding the growing AM community.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. My name is Joris, and I've been working in 3D printing since 2008. I was actually obsessed with the technology since 2004 when I read a paper by Hod Lipson and Evan Malone showcasing that they could 3D print a fully functional, really simple robot. And obsessed with the technology, got to work in it from 2008. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the people have changed in additive and how the technology has changed in that time. Um, so in the beginning, for me, the beginning, right? The technology is already like it got started in the mid '90s, of course. So for the beginning, for me, was a time of very fat Germans. We were very not very very much not a diversified industry. It was mainly in Europe, some American companies. We're not present in all the areas of the world, and the applications were very, very few and far in between. Um, a lot of people that I got to know in that time got very wealthy. So the people with their own businesses, some of them are billionaires, some of them are worth over 100 million or more. What I think is really interesting to you guys to know is that all the people I met from back then who'd done very well for themselves did not care about money and did it because they enjoyed very much this technology and working this technology, and they were passionate about excelling in this technology. It was not the people that were cutting the corners, and it was not the people that were looking to make quick cash. It was the people who wanted to build business. The picture on the right hand side is Charlie Fruit, who's from FIT. He's one of the people who just built his own business. He's AOS's first application engineer for AOS, right? And he built his own business, Fit, and also an offshoot of that is NetFab, which they then sold to Autodesk. And these are people that weren't entrepreneurs in it to make money, but entrepreneurs in it to build a business. And I think that's the really thing that I really remember, that we were very, very small and we always had to explain what we were doing. And those pioneers from that time are very, very specific people. So we can roughly divide the 3D printing era into three eras. So the first one is like the period of 1990 onward. These were like the scientist entrepreneur people, like Friedrich Kran, whose picture's there. Basically, these are hyper intelligent people who came from were university researchers who all of a sudden were on a research project to do something called rapid manufacturing or or any of it had like a ton of different names back then. And these people were very brilliant scientists who then ended up becoming business people, right? I think Friedrich Kran is the best example of this. He knew nothing about marketing. He knew nothing about business or HR or any of that stuff, finance, nothing. He had to learn everything on the job as he built his business over the past 25 to 30 years. And he had just entered a technology that he was passionate about. And with that technology, he saw the possibilities of endless manufacturing. And these guys did a lot of the pioneering work. And these guys are really brilliant. To a fault, I've spoken to them, and all of them are brilliant. They're just like, you may think you're intelligent or may be intelligent. You have to realize that there's people out there that are just like, let's say this is the bell curve. Maybe you're here, you're doing great, fantastic. But there's people that are like all the way over here, and that's really important to realize that it takes these visionary leaders. And I think the question was, these guys weren't trying to make money; they're trying to make a business. So they're looking at commercializing new technology. So, for example, Freed was the first one to realize like that they had to have file handling software to handle like the DICOM geometries, the geometries for medical files and stuff like that. So they needed to make that kind of software. Freed was one of the first people that commercialized dental guides. At the same time, he's one of the first people to commercialize the software for hearing aids. So you have people that are right again and again and again. And if you really want to build a business like this, you have to be right again and again. Like Stratus under Scott Trump was incredibly strategically astute and made a lot of the right moves in a very beholden, very steady way. Hans Langer at AOS has taken that company. It's 100% family-owned business. There are no outside investors. There are no VCs telling him to sell everything now. He has complete control over his, and now he's passing it on to his children. So these are people that are very different from most of the people you meet. Now, maybe you know somebody like this, but for that person to actually get the opportunity to do this and not make a mistake for such a long time is very, very rare. So these kind of guys are very, I look up to them, and they're very, very different type people. What we had is what I call, well, in the beginning, the materials we had were not functional. They melted at 50 degrees C. There was UV discoloration always. A lot of parts and SLA parts became brittle. File handling, it took maybe an hour sometimes to hold a file and that kind of thing. And what we saw is that everyone was doing their own thing, right? So 3D Systems were promoting SLA. And SLA was the be-all, end-all of the technologies, and they were targeting their own customers in their own market. This time, at one point, we started taking over a little corner of Euromold, which is a really big molding show. And that was it, kind of. The industry didn't really work together. Right? The industry just did its own thing. So Stratasys targeted its own customers. And everyone was kind of a prisoner of their own technology silo. So they had patents, which was wonderful, and a business that they protected with very high margins on machines and materials, also wonderful. But this kind of retarded the business. Everybody's making money, but of selling polymers for very a lot more money than we're usually, like, for $300 for something that in other context you'd pay $6 for. And the ideal thing here was that the prototyping. That's what we was doing in the first area. We're doing for, like, let's say, car companies are making concept cars, and for large companies, we're making, like, the next generation of consumer electronics prototypes. But nothing was functional really in this era, right? So era number two is the makers, right? This started, I think with MakerBot, of course, and with Ultimaker. There you had people that were just like makers as a hobby. So there were software people, a lot of them were software people or engineers, and as a hobby, they started making things. They liked to take apart radios or pick locks or figure out how to use a speaker, or make a speaker or something like that. People like Eric de Bruin, who I worked for, I got to work for him at Ultimaker. It's like I got to work for free at Materialize. It was a real honor to work with people like this, of this caliber. So Eric was just a maker. Like, he was a software guy, actually made like a web hosting. He's a web hosting guy. And then all of a sudden his hobby was all of a sudden generated money. These guys were unintentional entrepreneurs. Nearly all the first generation, except for, the MakerBot guys were very much focused on making money and stuff like that. But all the other people, they either tried to download and build RepRap printers at the time, or they tried to buy a MakerBot and get it to work. And they found that so difficult that they were just like, well, this is the story of Ultimaker. Let's do workshops to get other people to make these things. And then it got better and better and better. And then they said, well, let's just sell our own printer. All right. So it's kind of, they're unintentional. They're all bootstrapped. None of these guys none of the guys that actually made it ended up, apart from like MakerBot, I guess, in some way, ended up, going for VC money very early. They wanted control. They were happy to get paid to do this. There was a lot of open source people. There was a lot of people that were very, very idealistic, thinking we could solve all sorts of problems. All right. And a lot of these people, there was like this thing where actually a lot of these businesses shouldn't have made sense because there was no market. There was no investment. There was no technology. You didn't have the software you needed. You didn't have the hardware you needed. You didn't have the materials you needed. It was lunacy to start in this era, right? But because these people, like Max Vogue is another example, is a toy maker who all of a sudden ends up inventing the 3D printing pen and ends up selling millions of them. Right? These guys kind of ended up rolling into this, and because the unique affects this market, because Max was able to raise several $1 million from Kickstarter. Right? These guys were able to bootstrap these industries and take a lot of control of these companies and really grow them as kind of small to medium to quite large businesses. And that also comes with the idealism stuff. And it's a very different crowd than we're seeing now. Now, what we saw then is the hype delivery thing. So everybody was saying, like, everyone at Ford should have this, every engineer should have this printer, everyone should buy this. Meanwhile, half of prints failed, at least, with this era. The news media piled in, like The Economist especially, has done like amazing things for us. But at the same time, investors piled in, but not as they are right now. Investors piled in to a certain extent, and companies came in, but more of a business development guy would come and then say, oh, what does 3D printing mean for us? They saw it as a little bit kind of like, in Germany you say Spielerei, like it's like a little toy industry, right? Meanwhile, away from the desktop, which was the focus of all the media attention, we were getting millions and tens of millions of parts in powder bed fusion, in cobalt chrome and titanium for dental, millions of jewelry intermediates, right, and millions of hearing aids. So what was going on beneath the surface was actually much more interesting, but it wasn't being talked to because the desktop 3D printer story was very relevant to the media. Your mom can get a 3D printer. This can change your life now. And that meant that the part that was actually the least interesting of the market was getting the most attention. What we saw in the interim as well is that it takes us about 2 years to kill an industry. If we have an industry where there is a small part that needs to have an individual geometry, we can wipe it out in 2 years, right? So that's very interesting. That's a model for the future, I think. And I think we need to realize that once I worked at Materialize, which was around 2011, we at Materialize to have the golf ball rule. The idea is if it fits in a golf ball, it's a good business case for 3D printing. And now, of course, ideally, you'd also like it to save weight, consolidate parts, have unique texture, unique geometry, or need to be available at one place, right? But now we're moving from in this era, all of a sudden we're getting a little bit bigger than the golf ball. We're moving towards a tennis ball. And right now, I would say that for a lot of things, we're in a volleyball-sized part. Right? Anywhere between a marble and a volleyball is a good business case for 3D printing. If there's several of these added elements that give a lot of advantage, right? So we all know, of course, that this 3D printer on every desktop didn't really happen. I mean, there's a lot of people in the 3D printing industry don't have a 3D printer on their desktop. That led to a lot of disillusion by investors, by governments, by people who'd bought these printers and they hadn't worked for it. And that was, of course, a very, very negative kind of experience, I think, for a lot of us. And we saw that certain people were bringing the hype. Like I see Bree brought the hype, and I think he's responsible for a lot of good things, a lot of growth. But at the same time, he was responsible for overclaiming the current capabilities of printers that didn't work very well at all. So there's a kind of dual sword to the people that were active in this era. So now we're in the Spac era. You've probably noticed, you've read it in the news. So we're seeing a lot of commercialization of products. We're seeing a lot of like qualification of parts. We're seeing a lot of qualification of materials, machines for really critical applications in many, many industries, right? So a lot of the stuff you guys don't see is actually much more interesting because it means that in a ton of industries, from capital goods to space to military to lots of other things, there's so much going on that all those little bits are actually much more interesting than what's happening in the media's eye, right? Everyone's focusing on the same strategy. Everybody wants like to look at an ecosystem and make an ecosystem strategy. And what I like to say is the watches got better and the parties got worse, right? So everybody, we don't have that much contact anymore. I don't know everybody anymore. I used to literally know everybody. You would like literally almost everyone in the industry I would know. And now a lot of people have left, people have retired. So for me, it's less clubby, right? Which is bad. I think clubby is bad, but it's also less intimate, right? And it's less of us against the world kind of than it was before. There's less contact. People are less willing to do things for each other or to do things for the industry. But at the same time, there's more possible there because there's like oodles of investment cash flowing into this industry, right? So we really went from something very idealistic and very pioneering to very process driven and very kind of Six Sigma or kind of manufacturing or lean kind of driven. We're all about tracking and software and saving money and iteratively improving these processes. And this is the kind of the boring area at the time, but this kind of boringness, and we kind of fill out all the forums, we do our ISO implementations and stuff, has really led us to be very acceptable to a lot of like industry players, to a lot of industrial companies. We can now do business with them at their level, and we can really like work with them together with them. And this is kind of where we're permeating, we're creeping into, filling into the business life of everyone in the world, right? So the SPAC thing is, of course, ridiculously worrying for us as an industry because we clearly see there's too much money going in to these businesses. And then at the same time, we also see that some of these investments are not going to pan out. So there's a big risk to our industry at the moment that some of these SPAC companies will not do as well as one would think, and that could then sour people on all 3D printing investment. Meanwhile, for right now, for the next couple of weeks, right, at least maybe a couple of months, um, uh, there's an unmatched amount of money flowing in our industry, right? At the same time, we're not seeing much technological progress. I have seen very little technological progress in my time in the industry in terms of speed, in terms of definition, layer height, layered detail, accuracies. There's very little progress. But if we compare it to software, computers, everything that's happened in the last like 12, 13 years in these industries is going at a light speed, and we're going very slow, right? There's a lot of exciting things happening right now. We're getting new materials companies come in, right, that really change the cost and the performance of materials. We're getting all this stuff like, binder jet. There's a lot of hype around it. A lot of it is unwarranted, but it doesn't matter. There's HSS is now finally being commercialized. So we're seeing like much movement finally on the technology side to really a step change in the technology in terms of cost or speed, right? And we're seeing like a lot of really large companies actually pick and choose this technology to use it as manufacturing technology, and that's a big difference. So it's a really critical time in terms of implementing this. If we get the time to implement this squarely in a bunch of companies worldwide as a spare parts solution, as a qualified solution to make parts on an ongoing basis, as a mass customization solution, then we will have made it forever initially. We'll be able to propagate ourselves nearly forever. If at this critical time people sour on us too quickly, their breakup with us, let's say, might be quite harsh. So my name is Joris Peels. I hope you I hope this was a very valuable, or at least a little bit valuable presentation for you. I'd love for you to check out my articles on 3dprint.com, or to check out our 3D Pod, which is a podcast that we do on a lot of different podcast tools and things. You can download and watch those episodes. I'm also the Vice President of Consulting at Smart Tech Analysis. So if you need a market research report on 3D printing, you can reach out to us as well. And you can reach out to me if you have any questions or comments or anything like that at joris@3dprint.com. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope I inspired you or taught you something today. That would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for the amazing session. Hope you have learned a lot from this session.